Hello, in this video we're going to go through a quick example that illustrates some of the benefits of methods. And before we begin, one thing to note in case you are learning other languages at the same time is that methods in other languages might be called functions. One example is C++. So if you hear about functions in C++, they're talking about the same thing as we talk about when we're talking about methods in Java. So for the sake of this exercise, we want to use our imagination a little bit. So basically my program here obviously consists of 5 lines. But what I want you to imagine is that each one of these lines represents 100 lines of code that is the same. So what we see right now is if we think in this way is that this is a very large program in terms of number of lines. There's 500 lines of code, large being subjective really. But also that it's very repetitive. So if this first line represents 100 lines of code that is the same as this line that represents 100 lines of code and so on and so forth, we see that this program duplicates code over and over again. And this is a case where methods are useful. Methods are useful when you have the same chunk of code that is implemented over and over again. So what you do is, as opposed to writing out that code over and over again, you take it and put it in a method and then call the method to execute that code. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to write a method that's going to execute the 100 lines of code. So we write a method inside our class, but not inside of another method. So in this case, we see this is the end of my main. So if I go enter, I'm inside my class here. And methods at this point always start with the word public static. These are called modifiers. We haven't really explored what modifiers are yet, but they are something to keep in mind as you move forward. The next component of a method is the return type. That is what it spits out when it's done. So in our case, this is going to return nothing, so we put the word void. The next piece of information in a method header we need is the name. I'm going to call this method do something. Remember, make your method name meaningful. In our case, this is a silly example, so it's not as important, but if your method finds something, so find number. If your method prints something, print whatever it is. You want a meaningful method name because in your program you're going to invoke that. And if someone's reading your code, you want them to have an idea of what that method does. And then we open up a parentheses, and inside here we put our parameters. Our parameters are what the method needs in order to function. So in this case, the method doesn't need anything. So there are no parameters required, so we're going to put nothing in here. And then we open a brace, and then we have a close brace. So this is the end of do something. So what I do is I take the chunk of code that is repetitive and I paste it inside that method. So now, instead of actually writing this code out every time, what I can do is I can invoke the method do something. And we're going to invoke this 5 times. So what this program does is when you execute it, Java goes and finds the main method, and all programming languages have some form of main method. It is where the program starts running the code from, and it's going to come down and it's going to say do something, and what it's going to recognize is that do something is the name of the method here. So the program then stops, jumps down to here, executes this code to completion, and then once it's done comes back up, goes to the next line, sees do something again, comes down here, executes the code to completion, gets to the end, comes back up, and so on and so forth. So what happens now, while we save, is the program does the exact same thing, but I've significantly reduced the number of lines of code required. Whereas before I required 500 lines of code because it printed it 5 times. Now I need to write 100 lines of code and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more. So now it requires only 105 lines of code. So again, one of the big benefits of methods is that it reduces the amount of code that's actually needed. Another benefit is debugging. So let's put benefits here. 1, it reduces the amount of code needed. Okay. The second benefit is it makes it easier to debug. Because what happens is that, let's say I make a mistake writing out this 100 lines of code, I only have to go and change it in one spot. right? If I change it in one spot, then it changes for every time it is invoked, which is nice. So we can say it makes it easier to debug. That is find problems, but as well as change the program. Because say I decide to modify my program that I want to do something to do something slightly different. I only have to change the code in one spot. A third benefit is it's easier to read. So if someone has your program and they want to look at what it does, it makes it a lot easier to read. So for example, if I was looking at this program as someone wrote, I actually don't care how do something works. I just want to know that do something is invoked. So as opposed to having to read through huge amounts of code and identify each time, identify that there's duplicate chunks of code there, I can simply look here and very quickly see that the code is duplicated. As well, I can see that do something does something in particular. And again, if I was very specific in the naming of my method, it would give a very quick indication of what that method is actually doing. So it makes it easier for me to read. You know, if I was interested in the details of this, then I'd go down to the method and explore. But in many cases, I'm not. I just want this method to be invoked. So there's a quick little demonstration of why methods are useful. I hope this helped, and as always, please feel free to ask any questions, and I'm happy to make other videos. Have a wonderful day.